We're so excited that you're all here today. My name is Karen DeHaze, and I am the chair of Notre Dame Women Connect. For those of you who don't know, Notre Dame Women Connect is a national affinity group of the Alumni Association. We have national events like this one. We have events in your community. We'd love to connect you with those. And if you're not familiar with Notre Dame Women Connect, at the end of this event, find me up here in the front row, and we'll get you all set. So super excited about that. Also wanted to thank you all for bypassing the wine tasting down the hall to come here for today's conversation. Hi, Jean. It's my pleasure to kick off this event and get right to the core of why we're all here, to share the stories of the Notre Dame family so many years ago at the beginning of coeducation. It's my pleasure to introduce Kelley Tuthill, who will guide us through that conversation with our panelists. Kelley's a 92 grad. She's currently Chief Operating Officer of Catholic Charities in Boston, and she's a former news reporter in Boston who won an Emmy for a series documenting her own journey with breast cancer. We'll hear everyone's stories today. I'll give you a brief synopsis of Kelley's on-campus story. She was in the first class to live in Siegfried Hall. Now I understand a men's dorm. Yep. She served as the editor-in-chief of The Observer, and she served on the Arts and Letters Advisory Council at Notre Dame since 1999. We're excited to have her here today. She's such a gifted journalist and moderator, and she'll help us hear the stories from all our panelists. So let's welcome the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for including me, and thank you, everyone, for being here. It's nice to see you all. So I'm going to take you back for a minute, back to 1972. All in the Family was on your TV set at home. The best picture that year, The French Connection. Richard Nixon was running for re-election, and a little song called Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, What a Good Wife You Would Be, was playing on the vinyl, or in some cases, soon to be a big deal, the cassettes were coming. So here at Notre Dame, change was coming. Change had arrived. And these folks, they lived it. And today they're going to tell you what it was like. So I'll ask our panelists to start. You want to go last, so I'll start with Jack on the end. And tell us who you are and why you're here.
Jack Leitch, class of 74. I majored in civil engineering here, from New Jersey, and live in Indianapolis now. And one of the great things, my wife, Mary Kay Conity Leitch, graduated from St. Mary's the same year, and we've been delighted to have all four of our kids come to Notre Dame and St. Mary's. So, thank you.
I'm Betsy Brosnan. I'm class of 1976. And I will say all the hype about Notre Dame going coeducational when we first arrived just made it that much more exciting to be going away from home to college, right, for your first year, at the first year when Notre Dame is coeducational. And I just grasped it all. I tutored off campus. I joined the yearbook staff. Everyone wanted you to be a part of things. And a friend of mine actually asked myself and a few people in the audience, did we want to be Batgirls for the Notre Dame men's baseball team? And of course, we said yes. You know? And then I got into student government, and I was the class secretary for junior and senior year. And I would be remiss if I don't say it was in senior year, second semester, I met Pete Brosnan, my husband, who is here in the audience. Thanks for coming. And he's here with my daughter and my two granddaughters. And so it's been a great role from here.
My name's Augie Grace, class of 76. I served as the junior class and senior class president for the class from 72 to 76. Betsy, as she mentioned, was our class secretary. Sue Caranti, who's right up front here, was our class vice president. And I'll just save my rest of my remarks for later.
Okay, look forward to it. Go ahead, Sharon.
I'm Sharon Mcauliffe. I'm class of 1974. Yeah, we got a lot of 74 women here, that's right. I was a proud inhabitant of Baden Hall. There's a lot of Baden women here too, that's right. Woohoo! I transferred over from St. Mary's. I did my first 2 years there and transferred in the first year. And I, like Betsy, was involved in the student tutoring program. And then my junior year, I think I joined CELA, Council for International Lay Apostolate. And so I see a couple people shaking heads here, the precursor of the Center for Social Concerns. So that was a big thing that I was involved in while I was here.
I know you don't like to go first, but I'm going to make you go first now. So Sharon, you were at St. Mary's. What drew you to want to come across the street?
So I really felt like I was at Notre Dame, at least by my sophomore year, because my sophomore year, I took all of my classes at Notre Dame. You know, we had the coeducation program, and my mother was a doctor and didn't think I should go to St. Mary's. It wasn't a tough enough education. My father was class of 44 undergraduate at Notre Dame, 49 law. And he said to my mother, I'm sure Notre Dame will be co-ed by the time Sharon graduates, and she'll get a Notre Dame degree. Wow. So thank my father that, you know, I wanted to come here, and I took all as many courses as I could my sophomore year at Notre Dame, because I also worked for the Dean of Admissions at St. Mary's, Sister Raphaelita. If any of you remember Sister Raphaelita. Yes, and I had a sense that things were not going well as a student intern in the Dean of Admissions office. And so I thought, if this doesn't work, I want to have Notre Dame grades. So I had a plan. Yeah, and I wanted to carry on the family tradition.
You could tell the merger wasn't going well.
Yes, I could tell it wasn't. So, yeah. So the plan worked.
Okay. And Augie, how'd you end up here?
I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. My senior year, I was thinking about different schools in pretty much the East Coast. I ran into a good friend of mine who was a year ahead of me, who attended Notre Dame, Tom Young. Tom said to me, you should consider going to Notre Dame. You'll love it. He said, just look into it. So I looked into it. I love the academics. I love the sense of community, both the 4 years that you're here and the community that you have after you leave here. So I decided to come to Notre Dame. And he said to me, on top of it, you'll be in the first class of women to go for 4 years. And so I'm thinking, Kelley, you'll appreciate this. I'm thinking, I did a visit to the UMass Amherst, and went to one of the co-ed dorms, and I was walking to go to the men's room, and women are walking right by me and everything. And I said, oh, this is what co-education's going to be like. So, so Tom did not tell me there was only going to be 125 women in my freshman class, or 365 women in the whole school. So, but he's still a good friend of mine.
All right. Little bait and switch on that one. Betsy, what drew you here?
You know, my experience was a little different. Sharon and I were talking about this, and I'm sure all the ladies in the audience who were freshmen coming in the fall of 1972, when we were deciding where to go to school, from personally me, I was looking for a Catholic school, and you right away say, well, which are the best Catholic schools out there? And number two, which are well known, and Notre Dame is right there, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, we can apply there. If we were a year older, we couldn't have applied to Notre Dame. So to me, it was kind of like a no-brainer, and no parent is going to say no to applying to Notre Dame, right? And so I think it was easy for us to say, yes, I'm going to apply, but I think we were really lucky too. And I've talked to a lot of the ladies in the audience, and you know, it just so happened the stars aligned, and first there was going to be a merger. We were going to be part of Notre Dame. The merger fell through. We were still part of Notre Dame, and I think if luck comes your way, we got to grab it, and I think all of us in that class have done that. So.
And Jack?
Well, from New Jersey, neither of my parents went to college, and I remember I had a friend, not a girlfriend, but a girl who was a friend, and her father was the athletic director at Rutgers. And I applied to Notre Dame on a whim. I was accepted about 4 months later, I think it was. And I also had applied to Western Maryland College in Westminster, Maryland. And I went to see my girlfriend's father, and I said, Mr. Kramer, I've been accepted to Notre Dame and to Western Maryland College. Where do you think I should go? He said, well, if you want to go to high school again, I go to Western Maryland College. But if you want to go to college, I go to Notre Dame. And so I came out here sight unseen, had never been to campus before, and was lucky enough to play baseball for 3 years under Coach Jake Klein. So, well, I watched a lot of baseball from the bench. Let me make that clear.
Did Betsy ever bring you a bat?
Probably not, because I was sitting down.
All right, ladies, so talk to us about what it was like. Where did you live? So few women, 1 or 2 dorms at the time. What was social life like? Give us a little taste of the experience.
Want me to take that, Sharon?
Yeah, go ahead.
And again, we have such different experiences, but I will say overall, it was a year of change, and we kind of knew it right when we came in. I'll tell you a quick story. My first semester, freshman year, 8 o'clock class, French. From day one, when I spoke in class, the professor just mimicked my French accent or lack thereof, and granted, and it just got more uncomfortable as the semester went on. But I will say, when it was either late November, early December, I'm walking to this 8 a.m. class, and I see my professor up ahead of me, and it's freezing cold, the snow is coming down, it's windy, and I thought, I'm not going to slink behind him, so I thought, I'm just going to zoom on to class, and as I passed him, I greeted him in French, he greeted me back, and then I said in English, it's really cold out here, I'll see you in class. And I went on, he got to class as he's taking off his scarf and his hat, he turns to the class and he said, I realized this morning I have an apology to make to one of my students. And that was just an aha moment for me as an 18-year-old, that I really heard my mother. It's like, just treat people the way you want to be treated, right? And then when I left class, I just left with a real sense of respect for my professor, because he didn't have to apologize publicly. So I think it was an aha moment for him too. It's like, change is here. So this is what I have in class, this is what I have to deal with. And all the other professors I had, I never experienced anything like that in class. So I didn't hear a lot of that, you're not welcome. I felt very welcome when I was here.
Sharon, could you have a dance with so few women and so many guys?
So I'm not sure, maybe some of the people in my class can remind me. I think they still brought the buses in, right? Okay, so 1974, there's certain things. Somebody in the audience from Baden, I think, was reminding me of something so we came in the fall, and by the spring, when bookstore basketball came, I think some of us were feeling empowered by then, like, we're here, we're staying. And somebody put speakers on the top of Baden Hall and started playing Helen Reddy's I Am Woman during bookstore basketball. I mean, some of you must remember that, because I always remember that, and someone said that. So, right? So Trish Moore is over there saying, yeah, we did that, right. So by spring, we really felt empowered to kind of do that. There were junior transfers, not all from St. Mary's, too. And I have a couple friends that transferred in from other schools other than St. Mary's, and they had a really tough time. I had a brother who was a senior who was class of 72, so he had just left and he was on the track team. So I always felt like I had a very protected experience, and some of my friends didn't. I came in knowing people. I was almost just like moving across the street to live in a different dorm. But there were those experiences, like they used to have the panty raids, as they said, where everybody would head over to St. Mary's, and I was talking to someone about this experience today. For those of you that lived in Baden, I was in the Baden laundry room, which when you went in the door was downstairs. And I was oblivious to the fact that this was the night that they were going over to St. Mary's our first year. And I'm walking up that stairs that used to have a lock on it, because we had locked dorms, right? No other dorms on campus were locked, but we had electronic cards, because you're not getting to those 300 women. And I got the electronic card in my back pocket of my jeans, and I'm carrying my laundry, and the next thing I know, I am at the locked door at Baden, and the entire stairs is filled behind me. And they're all going, give us your card, give us your card. And I'm standing there, and they're all yelling and chanting and everything. And I'm thinking, okay. But I also was a secretary for Sister Karen. Everybody remember Sister Karen, our residence advisor? So I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my job if I give her my thing. Luckily, somebody from the first floor of Baden, I think it was Linda Slaughter, if anybody remembers Linda Slaughter. Yes, Linda Slaughter came and opened the door and saved me. So it was a strange experience. We were here, we thought, oh, we've moved over, like all 100 of us, juniors, like big deal. And life kind of went on in some ways, I think, those first few years, as if the women really weren't here. It wasn't like, oh, here are these 100 women so great, we're going to change things. No, the buses still came in from girls' schools to the Circle, and the dances were held with the visiting girls from girls' schools.
And did you go to the dancers?
No.
Or no?
No. No.
So that these young ladies are brought in,
That's
and you do your own thing.
I did, and
Okay.
and I think most of the women that are my class, I see a lot of them sitting out. Most of the women that are my class, I think, if they had come from St. Mary's, they probably already had their network of friends already. And I was in sociology, and Notre Dame did not really have a strong sociology department, so there were a lot of Notre Dame guys that had come over to St. Mary's sophomore year to take sociology classes. And luckily, a whole group of them lived in Fisher Hall. So I used to play cards with a bunch of guys from Fisher Hall so it was, it was, how could you have a normal sort of male-female relationship when you got 80-something in the class of 1974? So most of us, I think, just continued on with the friendships and relationships that we had formed our first couple of years. And then sort of thought, God, we're here, why aren't things changing really quickly? But, there was a handful of us.
So Augie described as a bit of a bait and switch. So now you find out you're at this campus, and there's women here, but not very many. Do you remember the buses of young ladies coming in? What was the social life like from your perspective as one of the guys in this class?
The social life was difficult, and I give a lot of credit to the women in my class. They call them pioneers, and they really were pioneers, and they're very, very special people. To be honest with you, some people had difficulties, some people struggled, some people had a great experience the whole 4 years. But the men struggled too, and I think that needs to be said. I remember I lived in Kavanaugh. Even though Kavanaugh was on the North Quad, we used to eat at the South Dining Hall, and we were in what was called the forced triple. So it was bunk beds, and then they put another day bed in because they didn't have enough housing space for everybody. And so there were 4 forced triples on my floor in Kavanaugh. And so we would go and we would eat over at the dining hall. We'd get together, walk over, have dinner in the dining hall, come back, do your studies and everything. So you became very close. And I remember just before we're taking exams the first semester, which was a difficult time for everybody. But I remember one person said, I'm thinking about transferring. And when I go home, I'm going to do some research. I want to see, what if I can transfer to my community college, my state college. And then as we talked about it, almost everybody in the room said either they had thought about transferring or they were going to do that over Christmas break. And what happened was nobody transferred. And instead, I like to think of what happened was they came back the sophomore year, the junior year, the senior year, and they made changes. They tried to make this a better place for their classmates and for people who were going to be following them. And Janine Sterling said today, she mentioned the word perseverance. And I think there was perseverance with the men too, because the men were not satisfied with the situation at the time, but the women came back every year and they made changes, and the men did too, and hopefully working together, we made this a better university.
Thank you for your leadership as a student leader. And Jack, you were sight unseen. So talk to me about you get here. Was it what you expected? And did you have a hard time like Augie describes?
I'm sorry.
Did you have a hard time as well? Was it what you expected?
Well, my junior year, I remember getting, the grades were always sent home back then. I don't think they do that anymore. And my mother called me and said, your grade point average has gone down. And I said, well, Mom, there are women at Notre Dame now. And that's made a big difference. And it was interesting. It was, it was just different. All of a sudden, it was wonderful to have women in the classroom because none of us were going to go to work for an all-men's company after we graduated. And so we had the benefit of having a perspective of women as we went through our different courseworks. And so I think that was something that I probably came to appreciate a little bit more after a sophomore year. But it certainly has changed the institution to be much more like the world out there, and how we can bring the values that we have from Notre Dame into our workplaces and our families and homes.
As you've all indicated, change is hard, and it was hard for this institution at that time. Any particular reactions from alumni? We always hear those images of alumni coming to the female dorms. This is my room. Any reactions like that, or professors, as you described, Betsy, that stand out from that time, good or bad?
I had an experience with one professor that I'll always remember, Professor O'Brien, which was very different than Betsy's experience. He did not, I really felt I was the only woman in the class, which was kind of unusual in arts and letters. In the arts and letters, you know, I've gotten to know people through the Alumni Association. I've worked through the years, and people like in engineering and sciences, and they were the only person in their class. But it was unusual in arts and letters, I think, to just be the only woman. But he did not want me in the class, I really felt. And the class was actually called Social Deviance or something like that. So he would tell the worst stories, and then he would say, well, Ms. McAuliffe, would you like to comment? Oh. And there would be silence in the room. And as I said, I had a brother who was an athlete. He wasn't on the football team, he was on the track team, but he knew then the football players ran track. So this one guy, we didn't have phones, you couldn't text the guy, so I would not go to class if I didn't know George. George would always sit next to me because he knew my brother from the track team. And he was a big guy, Haydick, I think, George Haydick, right? Sat in this class next to me as sort of like my protector. And then when the professor would put me on the spot and embarrass me, he would just sort of sit there when these other guys would like sneer. I don't know what the heck I said, I don't know what women's perspective I gave, I didn't have the women's perspective to give, but yeah, that was not a good experience, you know.
That's not a position that anybody wants to be in. Any other good or bad experiences?
I really will say I don't remember anyway anyone saying, oh, you shouldn't be here. And now I will say, you know, I was up on 4th floor Walsh Hall freshman year, and no one went up to look at the rooms on 4th floor. So I did not have that experience.
He was the only one that I had that experience
Yes,
with.
yes.
You know, on the other hand, to balance it out, one of the reasons I begged Notre Dame to take me was that it was a bigger university. You know, I had this dream from the family to come here, but also taking courses my sophomore year. I mean, some of you probably talked Professor Bellows, he used to teach in the auditorium. Did you take his class? No, I didn't. It was an anthropology class. It was amazing. And so I wanted to have some of those opportunities for a bigger university. Somebody spoke about this earlier today. There weren't many women faculty. But one of the courses I took was an English class from Sister Madonna Kolbenschlag. Yes, oh my gosh. And you know, this was really the first time I had seen a woman, you know, talk about feminism and things, and it was an English class, and some of you she wrote a book, she went on to write a book, and she was amazing. So there were definitely way more positive experiences with, you know, professors and faculty and that kind of thing than that one.
You were both student leaders. How was the administration in all this? Did they do some good support, or were there things that maybe they improved upon as the experience went on?
I think there was tremendous support, especially from the president of the university, from Father Hesburgh. But I think and Sharon, you probably know this better, when the merger fell apart, things had happened very quickly, and I think some things just never really got done. And unfortunately, I don't think, and maybe the women can respond to this, I don't think they ever brought the women together over the first year to say, how are things going? How can we make improvements? Because there were things that needed to be improved, but it took time.
Yeah, through the years, I think some of the women have stepped up and said that, you know, like they could have asked. I know other people have said that. Father Hesburgh, I don't know, Betsy will have to comment on this because we got Walsh Baden here, but Father Hesburgh was very attached to Baden. He had actually been my dad's dorm advisor after the war. Some of you are shaking your heads there. And there were a number of us whose dads had lived in Baden Hall when Father Hesburgh, you know, had been the advisor there. So Father Hesburgh would come for pizza parties at Baden Hall and really, you know, really make us feel welcome and just say, you know, we're so glad you're here. And it wasn't just the banner at the beginning, it was through the year. And actually, my mom ended up passing away when I was on the SELA project my junior summer, and Father called me. Father Hesburgh called me to check on me during the school year, the next year, because I'm from Syracuse and he's from Syracuse. So you know, there was a family connection there. But he wasn't just me. I've heard that, you know, you hear the stories about everybody. He reached out to so many students over the years. And he was really committed to making us feel welcome.
But there were no surveys, Betsy, or focus groups, or things we would do today.
Well, that's just it. We have to remember this was 50 years ago, and you know, 50 years. Think about that. So we didn't do surveys, right? I mean, I will say, you know, because one of the questions we talked about was what did they do right? And I truly believe the thing they did right was when that merger fell apart. They didn't pause and say, oh, we better study this. We're going to wait a year. They said, well, we're going ahead, because that was Father Hesburgh. That was his goal, to have a coeducational university. And so I think they did the absolute right thing. And I think it was on speed. You know, they had to keep moving to get that thing going. So I give them a lot of credit. I think we've all learned a lot in 50 years, right?
Well, Jack's grades were plummeting, so clearly things must have been getting better over the 4 years. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say that I, in retrospect, I think it would have been a little bit more thoughtful to build a couple of residence halls for women and populate them rather than displace 2 residence halls of men. That was a really tough time, because as my grade point average was going down, you had to have a better grade point average to stay on campus to transfer to another residence hall. And that's the one little tweak I think I would have made, to just have women come to a couple of 1 or 2 brand new residence halls and create the environment and you know, the history for those halls. But that's ancient history too. So.
Well, it is, but we're here to talk about ancient history. I'm going to pull that thread a little bit more. So, you know, I joked at the beginning of the music and stuff, but really, the guys who were here, they were pretty happy, right? I mean, there was a culture that was pretty ingrained. So the upperclassmen, men, talk to you about kind of the way things were before it all sort of changed?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there were a number of people who, you know, who came here because it was an all men's institution, and then it wasn't, and so that changed things. I wasn't one of those. I just wasn't. But those would have been the disgruntled male students. But you know, that's kind of what I think.
It's not like we could have messed things up too much. There were only 300 of us in the middle of thousands.
So, where did I live?
I asked where he lived.
I only knew one student at Notre Dame, and he was an alumni, so I said alumni, and then they assigned me to Zom Hall. So my academic career was off to a tough start, going from A to Z. But it was, you know, back then there were just great relationships, and I've always thought that the Stay Hall program was much better than fraternities and sororities, because you don't have to go through some process to be accepted. You're accepted when you are accepted into the school, and then you learn how to live within the community, and that was good fun. Still in touch with we have 13 members of my class who have a website called CyberZom, and so we do all kinds of stuff there. I don't want to tell you we bet on things, but it's been a great way to stay in touch. And when one of the fellows was a computer professor at Villanova after he left Notre Dame, so he set it all up. Dan Joyce, who's a great friend.
Well, you were all pioneers for participating in this great experiment. How prepared were you to be a pioneer? Sharon?
I didn't really think of myself, I guess, as a pioneer. You know, as I said, coming from St. Mary's, there had been, you know, you took the bus, you went over to Notre Dame for classes. It was just the only pioneering or the perseverance that Janine talked about, you know, was just that this feeling like when the two schools were separate and then you just sort of moved across the street, well, now everybody's going to be really happy for us. But Jack's right, not everybody was happy for us. So you know, there would be those stop-up moments for me, like with Professor O'Brien or with someone saying, like, you don't really belong here. And I'm like, oh, no, yes, I do. You know, I've been here. I was taking classes here last year. I'm here. And, you know, the hard thing is that I think every person in that first cohort of women had to find their own little niche. And if you didn't, then those, you know, I think some women didn't stay. I see people shaking their heads. I'm sure some of you knew people that couldn't handle it, because you really did need to find your own support group. You know, I grew up with 3 brothers, and you know, it's just kind of like I learned early on you had to sort of tough it out, and so this was just one more thing I was going to tough out, you know.
Augie?
I wasn't prepared at all. You know, graduated from a public high school in the Boston area. I was co-ed, and so it was very, very different. And after being here for a couple of years, I said, you know, things have got to change. We've got to make this a more habitable place. And that's why I ran for class president. I asked Betsy to serve with me. I asked Sue Caranci to serve with me. And we just wanted to try and bring people together in a different setting, in a more informal setting, so that people could really get to know each other. But even back then, people were still kind of mixed up with the numbers and the ratios and things like that. So I don't know if, Betsy, if you remember this, we used to campaign, and we went to each of the dorms our sophomore year, and we went to each of the sophomores' rooms to tell them what our plans were going to be, and, you know, what our agenda was going to be. And I remember one, so we had 2 males and 2 females as part of our ticket. And I remember one classmate coming up to me and saying, well, why do you have 2 women on your ticket if they don't make up 50%? You know, so some people are still kind of locked in that. But I think we were able to, you know, make a lot of progress.
Oh, yeah, I think we did a lot. I always looked at our role, number one, as Junior Parents Weekend. That was part of our job. But we were there for social events, I think. Maybe that was what my role was. But, you know, we got the dances, and I think we got a lot of interaction between the males and the females.
And Jack, did you feel that you were participating in something that made you sort of a pioneer, knowing that, you know, you were part of this change?
Yeah, I did. I really did. Because first of all, there was no history about women, and so that, you know, that was going to be created in the early years, and being a part of that was really very useful. And I'm happy to say I think that we're in a way better place now than we were then, but we've learned over the last 50 years how to get there.
We sure have. We're going to get to audience questions in a minute, but I would like to ask you one last question before we get to the audience questions. Being a part of Notre Dame at that time of great change must have had impact on who you are. I know we've got grandchildren in the audience, how you model for them your life and what you value. So share that with me, and I'll start that end. Jack, go ahead. You can go. How did it change your life?
Well, it made me understand that the U.S. and the world was a bigger place than just New Jersey and New York. I got to meet just a great number of people who were just really sharp, and I'm excited to have been very involved with the Notre Dame Senior Alumni, as well as the Alumni Association over the years, because it's kept us in touch and together, and continuing to help people understand the mission of Notre Dame and what we're all about. And you know, I hope my young grandchildren are able to get in here too. Let's make another generational thing.
You know, I would say, speaking for all of us in the class of 1976, that the difference from freshman year to senior year was absolutely amazing, and I think we understood why people were asking that question. Well, how was it freshman year? Because freshman year, it was just, we didn't know anything different. By the time we got to senior year, it was just a more relaxed atmosphere. I had a lot of guy friends, and I think all of us out there would say the same thing. And so I think this really prepared us for the workforce. for being one of a few females in the accounting industry and the physician, whatever we chose. So, and let's face it, we've all in this room, I think we've made some of the best friends of our lives here. And I think it was because of the camaraderie and what we all went through. So, wouldn't change it for anything.
I think it was things did change, as Betsy said, over the 4 years, and a lot of it just had to do with the normal interaction between the men and women over the 4 years, over just, ordinary stuff. And then eventually people got to know each other better. I think it might have taken us a little bit longer for the men, but I think eventually the men realized they had some pretty amazing women in their class, and hopefully the women realized there were some pretty amazing men in the class also. But it was difficult, but I think together we were able to get through it.
And you never regretted not going to UMass?
Never.
Sharon?
I think two things come away from me. One was being involved in SELA my junior and senior year, and working with both men and women that were so community service oriented. And I kept that up as I moved on out of Notre Dame with the local alumni club. And having been here in those days, I was the only woman in the club. Took me a couple years to realize I had to say, they had me be the secretary originally. And like 2 years out, I finally said, excuse me, just because I'm the only woman in the club, I'm not being the secretary anymore. So they said, okay, well, we're gonna have this new role and you can be the community service coordinator for the summer service project. I said, fine, make some guy the secretary. So, but I was comfortable in that environment just because of what the odds had been while we were here. So I could continue to stay connected to Notre Dame, which was important to me. But the other thing is, and then in my career life, I'm an attorney, and there were not a lot of women. There's a time in my firm that there were only 2 women, and 2 women partners, and that whole experience kind of made me comfortable with that. And now I'm having a hard time pulling back because we have 50% of the people in our firm are female attorneys. So I don't want to leave because, I'm just so pleased that there are, so many women involved in the occupation and things. So I think it prepared me for that.
That's awesome. Thank you all so much. And I know our audience, I'm sure, has some questions. So don't be shy. We have microphones that you can come up to. We do have a recording of this, so if you come up to the microphones, we can make sure that the folks who are going to watch this can hear you as well. Any questions? Go ahead.
I just know that Augie was lucky. He got to stay in one dorm the whole time, but Betsy moved. That the early years, people should talk. I know there were guys who had to move to 3 different dorms in 4 years or got really truly kicked off campus. There were women, because they didn't want all freshman dorms, that had to move. So if they want to, I don't know if everybody realizes that, because I'm like you, Jack. I love the stay hall system, and I got to stay in Walsh all 4 years, but we lost roommates who were willing to take another pioneering step. So if you guys want to comment on that.
Just to kind of comment on how the dorm situation evolved, because by the time I got here, we were in the dorm, all of us, all 4 years. But I know my dad's time in the early 60s, he moved every year, and they picked, you got a better dorm, when you were a senior. So talk to me about how coeducation affect that strong residential hall system Notre Dame is known for.
Well, I will say, I started in Walsh and then pioneered what were we called the pioneers over to the North Quad into Farley, which we were able to stay in for 3 years. And I will say, to your point, Jack, that I think we did feel bad for kicking people out of Walsh and Baden. And then the poor Farley guys and the Breen Phillips and Lyons, yes. And by no means did we not realize that was a very sensitive subject, and I know you were crowded, but again, we did all work that out. So, and just added to what we learned about ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, because it didn't go exactly how it was supposed to go. The housing wasn't thought about in as much care as it could have been to make it a little smoother. And knowing how people feel so strongly about the residence halls here, it's a touchy topic. In the back?
Yeah, I have a question about some of the old traditions that died during the 70s and the role that women played in the end of some of these things, like panty raids, food fights, North versus South Quad snowball fights.
So the question is about what traditions died.
Those all ended during that time as women were becoming.
Yeah, so the question is about traditions that died during those early years of coeducation. I will tell you, I arrived in the fall of 1988, and there was a panty raid. And I wrote about it for The Observer, and they crank called me, and I wasn't popular for writing about the panty raid. We had dorm phones back then in your room, not cell phones, but there must have been traditions that were here before that disappeared. Jack, go ahead.
One was Zom always enjoyed playing Kavanaugh in football because we thought they were a women's dorm back then when we beat them every year. So, it had been a women's dorm for a while. So.
Were there food fights in the 60s that I don't know about? Was that a big thing? Was it Animal House here? I didn't know.
Did you ever experience a food fight? Anybody?
You didn't? Yeah, South Dynamo.
Oh,
yeah.
see, I never experienced
Jello.
it. It sounds like everyone else
They used to
did.
use
Okay,
the Jello.
food fights.
Yeah, Jello. I think they used the Jello.
And did the arrival of women stop the food fights?
Not that I know of,
Obviously
because there was
not.
definitely a Jello fight in South Dynamo when I was
Okay.
there one time. Right.
Any other traditions? Well, eventually they stopped bringing in young ladies from other colleges and high schools, I'm told, were brought here. My dad used to tell me about those women who were busted. That obviously changed at some point.
Thank God some traditions did end. So.
Some were gone for a good reason.
Great.
Any other questions? In the back? Oh yeah, way back.
Since you mentioned getting stuck on the steps of bed with your laundry, even into the 80s, men got their laundry done. When you're kind of mother, you weren't really ready for us in the dorms, like kind of practical things like that.
Yeah, so the question is about other traditions that stopped, including laundry. When I arrived in 1988, they were still doing the men's laundry, but not the women's laundry. And the story was that women like to do their own laundry. Eventually, it became a pay service, and then there was house cleaning too for a long time in the dorms. And then eventually, in the 80s, we got spray bottles and sponges instead. Do you recall the laundry service? And when you you were doing your own laundry, so clearly nobody was doing your laundry at St. Michael's Laundry, right?
Right, and my roommate and I, when we snuck out this morning over and we met the current summer advisor there, she let us into Baden, and we were working around, and my roommate was one who said, she said, yeah, well, that's where the laundry was for the guys. And I said, oh, I forgot that. It was in Baden. It was on the first floor Baden. And so one of the things they must have done between our sophomore and junior year when we came on campus 6 months later was they emptied out sort of some room just as you walked in. And there, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, any of you ladies, I think there was, okay, somebody's saying 3. I was saying, aren't there only 2 washers and 2 dryers for the entire 200 and something of us? Yes. So
But
you
the
had
men
to,
had their laundry
oh,
done.
but the men had their laundry done, yes.
And you guys got 2 washers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in fairness, one survey I do remember was, because I transferred over from St. Mary's freshman, to freshman year, was they did ask the women that were moving over, do you want laundry service?
Okay, so there was a survey
And
about
we had heard
laundry.
the horrors from the guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have wanted the laundry service, yes.
Apparently that was
So
true.
I think a majority of the women said, no, we'd rather not.
Okay.
We'd rather have, washer dryers in the dorm. And I don't know.
Clearly, these were the big issues of the day. Who's doing laundry? I believe Watergate was going on, but we were more worried about who was doing the laundry.
That was a great way to meet guys because they would come over and do their laundry.
In the back, is there a question?
So I just wanted to ask that I was also in Baden, graduated in 75, and even when my daughter graduated in 04, the difference in the strictness with the women's dorms as opposed, my husband's dorm, he was in Baden, got moved into Alumni, they had Wapatula parties in the hallway. Sometimes the rectors came to the Wapatula parties in the hallways. And for the women's dorm, my God, you were going to the nunnery if you...
So the a point being made is that the difference in terms of how women were treated in the residential system versus the men, and that I know was still going on in the 80s when I arrived. The women's, virgin vaults, locked in, everything, and the guys' dorms, it definitely felt like, they were guys, so, hey, whatever is happening here is cool. Did you experience that when in the early years of co-education?
It's interesting. I mean, I know that the guys' dorms, they did have their parties, but we also could do that. I mean, we hosted many parties, and Wapit.
Okay, keggers with kegs rolled up the north stairs.
In Farley, right?
Close your ears, grandchildren listening here. They did nothing wrong. They were at church the entire time they were here. Don't worry.
And it wasn't.
Oh, Sister Jean liked the party. Okay, all right. So the girls did have fun. Go ahead, Jack.
I was just going to say, and it wasn't only alcohol back then either. There was a little smoke hanging around the dormitories as well.
In the 70s? What?
But for those of us who transferred over St. Mary's, Notre Dame was freedom versus having to sign out, right? We used to have to sign out at St. Mary's every time you left the campus. And I used to be in the lobby at Holy Cross Hall, and they would say, "Hey, McAuliffe, what's your brother's dorm number?" And people would be signing out to my brother's room at Morrissey all the time. They kind of had a big party room, so they would be signing out to him. But so there was some freedom, even though there were some things that were not done right, and you had an electronic card to be able to come over and not have to tell someone, on a little plastic thing in Lamont Hall or Holy Cross Hall, where you were going. All of a sudden, we were like, whoa, we've arrived. We have made freedom. So there was a little bit of that.
Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate your candor today. They'll have to edit some of this out for the recording, but sorry about that. And thank you for being here. It's been awesome to hear your experiences. For you being pioneers, someone like me got to go to the school where my dad went. So that created just an awesome family dynamic that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't led the way. So thank you for being pioneers. Thank all of you. And now, Marianne Rogers will close out the session.
I'm Marianne Rogers. I'm the Northeast Regional Director for the Notre Dame Senior Alumni Association. And the Notre Dame Senior Alumni Association and Women's Connect sponsored this program together today. And we would like to thank our moderator, Kelley, and our panelists, Sharon, Augie, Betsy, and Jack, for participating, and we would like to give them a small token of our appreciation. And for those of you that don't know, the Notre Dame Senior Alumni Association is composed of alumni and friends age 60 and above, and we aim to foster programs that create opportunities for seniors to engage in programs that foster friendship, camaraderie, and service. So if you want to know more about the senior alumni programs, please feel free to talk to me after. And we have a wonderful website and send out a Golden Domer newsletter quarterly where you can read more about all of the programs we offer. So thank you all for coming, and amen.